Good morning, everyone. That was a beautiful song, brought back memories from the 50s. Yes, that's a beautiful song. Well, we're coming up to the Lord's Supper time, so I wanted to speak today of something pertaining to that. So this is the days before Jesus' death, the timing building up to the time of Jesus' death. So the topic that we're talking about is the Lord's Supper time. And we usually don't talk about it too much at other times of the year, maybe should be, but it's one of the ordinances of the church, right? Baptism is an ordinance, the Lord's Supper is an ordinance. I guess we only got two. So, but that's the one of the big ones when we come to the Lord's Supper time, when Jesus instituted something for us to do and then said, "This do in remembrance of me." That we really want to do. He was concerned, he was thinking of what was ahead for him. He knew what was coming. And he said, remember him. Remember what he was doing for us. It's a historical time for us. And for everybody that remembers it. It's really a historical date on a calendar. We try to remember anniversaries and birthdays because they're on a specific day of a month, of a year. And we remember those things. If we say the 4th of July, something clicks in your mind. You know what it is. You know why you only do it once a year, right? So when we look at an anniversary date of Jesus teaching the disciples these basic symbols, an unleavened bread and the unleavened juice, the fruit of the vine, the scripture calls it, to represent his pure body. No yeast in the juice, no yeast in the bread. Okay, pure because of his pure body that was going to be represented by those simple things. But also we're thinking of the exact timing. Now, I know we got a little problem with timing because Israel's way over there, about 8 hours that way, I guess, and we're over here. And yet this faith has to go to the entire world, right? Whether you're north, south, east, or west, wherever you are, it's the same faith. So we try to reckon the timing. When was the new moon visible in Jerusalem? You actually can find it out nowadays. It's pretty easy on the computer. Look for the moonrise, moonset, sunrise, sunset for Jerusalem. It'll pop up a chart for you, no problem. You could find out if the moon set before the sun did, or did the moon set after the sun did? And how far apart was it visible to the naked eye? Which would be the calendar of the Jewish time of the Old Testament, when they would say, this is when the month begins. And this is going to happen on the 14th day of the month. Okay, so then once you know when the first day of the month was, you count the 14 days and you're in business, right? But then you have to shift it so many hours to get to here. Regardless of when our moon sets or doesn't set. Because we're thinking of Jerusalem, right? It might be earlier, it might be later. We might say it should have been last night. We're in the ballpark, for sure. We're trying to be very close and not be radical, okay? We're trying to be very close. So we use the Hebrew calendar, and we're trying to get their timing for it. So we're remembering those things. So we need to celebrate this actual day when it really did happen, when Jesus instituted it. We want to talk at times about the season of the Lord's Supper, which might be what we're doing here today, and the days before Jesus' death, which I'm doing here as well, and then the Lord's Supper service itself, which is coming up this coming Thursday night. Wouldn't it be convenient if it was Friday night or Saturday night? Convenient isn't really in the program, is it? We want to do it as close to the exact time as we can. I know it's sometimes awkward. When I used to have to drive 45 miles, it took me 45 minutes. But we had to go. Children and all, and family, it was difficult. And I know some of you have a great distance to travel, and it's difficult too, to get up the next morning and go to work. But It's the exact timing that we're looking for, as close as humanly possible. The service after that is next Sabbath. I wouldn't just preach a generic sermon, you might say. There's, how many, a million? Sermons in the Bible, stories in the Bible and so on. But we want to talk about the resurrected Christ, because we don't leave him in the grave. Some people think of Jesus as a baby only. Some people think of him as being dead on a cross, and they keep a symbol of a cross with the body on the cross. Jesus wasn't on the cross that long. Then he was put into the tomb, and then he resurrected. And we need to be thinking of the resurrected Christ, the one that we serve, the resurrected Christ, and the one that went to heaven for us, is sitting at the right hand of the Father, and so on. So we want to think of those things as well. So we'll go into what would be called, too, a time element today, a time element of the duration of Christ in the tomb. There's a booklet at the back, nice one, good color on the front, and so on. It's a little bigger, probably about that size of booklet back there, with the time element. You might look at that. You might try to take one of those home and do it as a special study. This paper is one that we've put together all through the ones that helped and worked on the Steps to Truth correspondence course. This is a chart that's in that and included in the studies, because this chart starts back 8 days before Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper and was killed in the light part of the same day. We've had little corrections along the way, little additions along the way, and it wasn't too long ago when we found the word Passover was missing one of the S's in it. How did the rest of us miss it? I don't know, but Brother Ben brought that to our attention. So little fixes as time goes along, but it's a pretty good chart. It's loaded with verses, too many to use in a sermon, right? So you don't want to go, this is homework, right? Get a copy of this, we can photocopy it or email it to you and so on. The 14-inch paper is, I don't have an ability to copy it here, but we can email it to you in 14-inch, which spreads it out a bit. Or you can get it in the 8.5 by 11, which we could photocopy anytime and hand it out. But emailing works it nice, and you can copy it as well, or read it on the screen and enlarge it to read. But this will go back 8 days and to see what was happening each day. And then it goes forward through the 3 days and 3 nights that Jesus prophesied his own prophecy that he would be in the grave, in the earth. The King James says the heart of the earth. But he would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. If that is not true, we got the wrong Messiah. If he was not 3 days and 3 nights in the earth, in the tomb, you got the wrong Messiah. So you got to start thinking about this. Did Jesus prophesy incorrectly, and thus is a phony? Or what he said, did it actually come true? And the scripture bears it out. You can find it out quite easily. So you want to look at those things, and then you want to see what happened Saturday late afternoon in that week. He was to die in the middle of the week. He did. Wednesday, 3 days before and 3 days afterwards, and his death was in the middle of the week. Okay? Prophecy is true. You got the real Jesus. So what happened Saturday, late afternoon? What happened during the night and the morning of Sunday? And so on. And then a couple of days more after that is still in here to show the progression of days and what happened each day of those days. So ask for that. Either we can send it to you through email, or we can photocopy it in 14-inch paper and hand it to you. Okay. So let's take our Bibles and go to Exodus 12. We're getting the basis for where these dates come from. Why we are picking a certain day, or how would we know that certain day in the New Testament. So Exodus chapter 12, we'll start with the first verse, but we're really trying to get verse 2 and verse 6. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, so this is way back there when they were going to take care of this, especially when they had to sprinkle the blood and put it on the hyssop and strike it on the doorposts and so on. We're back at that time in Egypt. Verse 2, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. The Hebrew people have a dual first month. Their civic year is in the fall, the first day in the fall, first year, first month of the year is in the fall. The Bible timing is in the spring. And we don't want to try to tie it to anything in particular except the Jewish calendar. So this is the month A, or Abib, the first month. So God started that dating, that timing. Speak unto the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of the month, they shall take them, every man, a lamb, and the margin says a kid, because later it says either a goat. Uh-oh, got some power outages here. I hope that comes back soon. That's just the lunch whistle, not storm warning. Okay, I guess we'll just keep going and hope that the lights come back on. There, we're back in business again.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yes, right on. There will be a blink in the video. No, it'll just keep going.
Both are still going.
Both are still going, okay. So in verse 3 says, speak unto the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of the month, they shall take unto them every man a lamb according to his house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. So you figure out how many are in this household, how many senior citizens, how many young family members and their children of this house. You figure out what size lamb you want, because it's going to say more eating, less eating, and so on, if the lamb is too big and so on. Then in verse 4, and if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of souls. Every man according to his eating shall make your count for the lamb. So if your family is small, borrow the neighbor man, or join him, okay, in his household. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. He shall take it out of the sheep or of the goats, or from the goats. That's where you get the kid or lamb, either way. Now, also without blemish. If Jesus was going to fulfill the prophecy of being the lamb that took away the sin of the world, he had to be without blemish. His lifestyle and his physical makeup had to be without blemish. And that's true. In fact, they didn't even break his legs when they were going to make sure that they died before the sun went down. They didn't break Jesus' legs because he was already dead. Okay? And then verse 6, and ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month. They chose the animal ahead of time so that they could actually view that the animal was the right one, was without blemish and so on. And then they had to hold it until the 14th day, only 4 days later, of the same month. So 14th day of that first month. And the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And your margin says between the evenings. That's the twilight. When the sun is setting, you still have the light of the sun, and you can do your work and so on. When the sun has just gone down, you have the twilight, so you still have enough light to be working. That's when they were to kill it at that sundown, that close to the sundown. And then they would be able to do the butchering and get it indoors and so on, get the program started for eating it during the night. Now this is good reading if you kept going, what all they were supposed to do and how they dressed, what other foods was with it and so on. We don't have to worry too much about that because we're trying to get the month and the day of the month and the timing at the sun going down. That's why we take Christ's emblems when the sun is going down at the evening. virtually at sundown, or just after sundown, is when we're going to be doing that. Okay, so let's go to Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23, verse 5 and 6. In fact, in verse 4, it calls these feasts or high days holy convocations, which is the same kind of word that they use for a Sabbath. So let's see what happens here. In the 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. In the Old Testament, again, when I was looking back there last night, I looked specifically for words like the death angel. It's not there, right? The Lord said, I will pass. I will do this. I will do that. So God was very definitely involved in the firstborn dying in Egypt. Anyway, it was his power and his doing. But it was the 14th day of the first month is the Lord's Passover, when the Lord passed over the children of Israel that had the blood sprinkled on the doorposts and the lintel over the door. He passed over those houses, and those that did not believe that, their firstborn died, particularly those of Egypt, that their firstborn died. Verse 6, and on the 14th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's why we use unleavened bread, because Jesus would have been using unleavened bread. And of course, leavening is referred to as sin, being in something. But he had no sin in him, so we use unleavened bread. Unto the Lord. So this is the Feast of Unleavened Bread unto the Lord. 7 days he shall eat unleavened bread. So when this day started, they ate unleavened bread for 7 days. Verse 7 even says, in the first day ye shall have a holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. Regular work, service work, or regular labor work would be the day. It's a holy day. So we have to take that into the New Testament when it talks about the high day Sabbath. So, I know what that means. That comes from this holy convocation day, right? Okay. So we'll get back to that in just a few moments. Okay, then if we look in the New Testament, when we're looking at they call it type and antitype. What was the Old Testament like? What's the New Testament like? What's the image relationship between the two? The Lord's Supper. It's not a big meal. These guys had to eat it all, finish it up, or it had to be burnt in the morning, right? This is not a big meal. It's only the emblems that represent Jesus Christ. We're not going to have lamb and bitter herbs, and we won't be doing that. We're just having the emblems that represent Jesus Christ. So go with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Going here into the New Testament. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23. This is Paul explaining this very thing to the Corinthians. For I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. The same night. So this taking bread was first. Later in the evening, he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and along came Judas and betrayed him. He was taken captive, and so on. So that same night, when he was betrayed, that he took bread, verse 24, and when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you, this do in remembrance of me. He's concerned that we would remember him and remember this program, remember me. After the same manner also he took the cup, and when he had supped, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as oft as ye drink it in remembrance of me. Some say as oft might be multiple times, every first Sunday of the month, of the year. First Sunday of the month, 12 times a year. Some do it every time they meet together. We think that diminishes the strength and power of it to do it so often. It becomes commonplace. But also we want the anniversary date that will really say this is the time when Jesus did it. It becomes quite a solemn ceremony, you might say, one with honor and solemn. So we want to do it on the anniversary date. But we do it multiple times in our life, right? So as oft as we do it, multiple times in our life, that we would drink this cup, which is his blood, a representation of his blood. And this we do to remember him. Verse 26, for as oft as you eat this bread and drink this cup, ye do show the Lord's death until he comes. I like to read on this one because it gives us a warning as well. Wherefore, whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat that bread and drink that cup. We examine ourselves. We say, is there sin in my life? I better pray about it beforehand, right? You better get it cleared up before you come. That's that sort of thing. We're testing ourselves. We're judging ourselves to be ready to take the Lord's Supper worthily. But we need to do it. Don't ever count yourself out that I'm not good enough to be there, and none of us are worthy. None of us are worthy. We're just going to need to pray a lot and make sure that we are in tune with the Heavenly Father, that we have asked for forgiveness for all of our errors and lack of doing what we should be doing. And then come and take those emblems. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body, not understanding how serious it is. For this cause are many weak and sickly among you, and many sleep, meaning they've died. For if we would judge ourselves, we should not be judged. But if we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, that we should not be condemned with the world. Wherefore, my brethren, when you come together to eat, tarry one for another. We do that. We wait on each other. When we pass out the bread emblem, we all are waiting, holding it in our hand until everybody has it, and then we eat together. And the same with the juice. We tarry for one another. And then it says, if any man is hungry, let him eat at home, that ye come not together unto condemnation, and the rest I will set in order when I come. If it was a feast, it would be contest as to who could bring the most food, or the most special food, or, you start getting into something other than the focus on Jesus Christ. So we stay with just the basic emblems, and everybody is at par. Everybody's equal, whether it's a slave or an owner. And they sit down together to take the Lord's Supper. Common folk or those higher placed, they're all equal here before the Lord. Okay, so we've set up a few things there and talked about the New Testament. Jesus Christ is to us what the Passover was to Israel. Israel really did honor the Passover timing and what it meant to come out of Egypt. They were protected from the firstborn dying. Wow, what a protection, what a blessing. The following day they got to come out of Egypt. Well, it took them a little time. First they had to get orders from the Pharaoh. And Moses could not leave his house until sunrise, right? You have to read that. He was not allowed to leave his house. But Pharaoh was willing to get rid of him as soon as possible. But the next day they were able to come out, and then they got the orders to leave. Then they had to borrow from the neighbors, right? They were going to spoil Egypt. The neighbors said, here, take anything you want, just get out. So they gave them wagons, they gave them animals, they gave them whatever, just get out of here. And then, of course, you can't go in the dark. Well, almost. What happens 14 days after the new moon? Full moon. They might have been able to. So the Bible does comment about coming out in the night. But you know what? You have 1 million people and all those animals. It's going to take more than one night to get out of town. Okay. So, you have to understand some of the logic of it all. That they were free to leave. That's the big thing. They were free to leave. And so that next day, the 15th, was a high day for them to celebrate, to really enjoy the fact that they got freedom, that they're getting out of there. Okay, so after deliverance, in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 7 states, "For even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us." I had that written out so that I wouldn't have to look it up too much there, but Christ is our Passover. We're not celebrating the Passover, we're celebrating Christ. So in the New Testament, we don't refer to this night as coming for the Passover service or whatever. It's coming for the Lord's Supper service. We're remembering Christ, our Passover. So the high day Sabbath was on the 15th of the first month. In the daylight part, they were able to have the preparation day, the 14th, being when they had to kill the lamb. At the beginning of the day, the night first, the evening and the morning shall be the first day. The night is the first part of the day. So they'd kill the lamb, they'd eat the lamb, and the next morning they had to burn what they didn't eat. Had to be done with. Either eat it all up or burn it. Then in the daylight time, they would have had the preparation for the high day Sabbath. As later, they said, wow, we got out of there. They're really willing to celebrate the 15th. So in the Hebrew culture, the 15th day started getting higher and higher in value to them, because that was the day that they were saved, that they got out of Egypt. And so you'll hear that preparation day being the daylight part of the 14th. Turn with me to John chapter 19. John chapter 19, starting with verse 31. Try to travel fairly quickly here as well. But in verse 31, "The Jews therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath day, they killed Jesus in the daylight time of the 14th. And here he has died, and they don't want the bodies to stay hanging there because the high day was going to start as soon as the sun goes down. So they called the day before the preparation for the high day. But they said, we don't want the bodies still hanging there. That's going to be an embarrassment to the high day Sabbath, because that's the next words here. Hang on the cross on the Sabbath day, for the Sabbath day was a high day." Okay, that's the special day. So they went to Pilate, and they besought him to get them down, get them out of there. And Pilate, that they would break the legs of those three on the cross, that they might be taken away. They wouldn't take them down until they were dead. Well, what they used to do, this is a horrible situation, but they used to tie people on these crosses. And they'd starve to death there. And as long as they had enough strength to push up on their stick down below, their feet were nailed to or fastened to, tied to, they could push up and get air in their lungs. And then if they got too weak to not being able to push up, they would just suffocate because they couldn't get another breath of air. How long would they be there? Horrible amount of time. So this was actually merciful to that person to break their legs so that they could not push up to get air, and they'd be bleeding, and actually the pain would probably cause their minds to pass out, and they would die quite mercifully, really. So they came there and they killed the first one, broke the legs of the first one, broke the legs of the third one, and they came to Jesus and they said, he's already dead. Well, let's just make sure. So they stabbed him with a spear because they're up, a ways. So they stabbed him with a spear, and blood and water came out. It's quite unusual when you think about it. Where's that blood coming from that was pooled? Or water? This was actually like a miracle thing to them to know that this was the Messiah. This was an unusual situation. So then in verse 35 it says that he that saw it bare record. Who is this? He. John is always really careful to keep his name out of the story. He's the one. He said, I'm the one that's writing this. I bear record. I saw this, and my record is true. His record is true. And he knoweth that he saith is true. So he went through that. And then he mentions in the next verse about a bone of him shall not be broken. That's why the legs didn't even get broken for Jesus. Then along came Joseph of Arimathea. You don't hear of him elsewhere, but evidently this was a relative of Jesus, an uncle, because only relatives could claim the body of a prisoner or one that was killed for his crimes. But he came, and also the disciple that came to Jesus privately at night. Remember Joseph of Arimathea? This is him. What's the other one? Nicodemus is the one that came by night. But these are the two that are working here. Nicodemus is mentioned again in verse 39. And they went and they got the body of Jesus. They were able to claim it, cut it down, wrapped it in a cloth, and they had some spices with it, but later you'll know the ladies came with spices later to anoint the body. But they took it down, and in 41, now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein was never a man yet laid. So the tomb was made ready, but nobody yet has been put into it. And it was already arranged with a stone that could be rolled over the doorway to it. So they had to go there quickly. 42 says they laid Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day. You've got to quickly get this done because this is the preparation day. When that sun goes down, you're in trouble. You can't do that on the high day. So they got him in quickly before the time was up. Now, if this was now the beginning of the Thursday, you might say, he died on Wednesday, and was put into the tomb Wednesday afternoon as the sun was setting. So you'd have, now I've got to put night first, right? So you'd have the Thursday dark part, the Friday dark part. Oh, did I do that wrong? I'm still thinking one back. It would be like Wednesday night to us, but that's the first part of Thursday. So Wednesday night, Friday night, I still did it wrong. Thursday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night. It's 3 nights. Now you got the daylights in between here, right? So you have Thursday in the daylight, Friday in the daylight, Saturday in the daylight. You got 72 hours, 3 days and 3 nights. When did Jesus come out of the ground? Just when the sun was setting, Saturday afternoon. Look at Matthew, and sure enough, there it is. Matthew 28, verse 1. And Matthew was a man of numbers. That was his job in life, so he wrote with the date correctly. So if you were to take this chart, and I'll have to leave a lot of this with you, but if you take this chart as homework, go back and find out how many days beforehand that Jesus went on his journey to Bethany, and Martha prepared the supper and so on. The Sabbath that followed, when Jesus was coming into town, they had a triumphant entry with him sitting on the colt and came into town. That's the same day that Jesus wept over Jerusalem, and he observed the temple, and then he returns to Bethany, the little town of Bethany. On Sunday, he went out and he cursed the fig tree because there's no figs on it. And then he cast out the money changers out of the church that were selling for the Passover. They figured, aha, this is a way of making money. I can bring in these animals, any type of animals, good or about so good. And somebody comes from a distance and they couldn't bring their animal all the way, so they came with their money. They could sell it. There's rules to this. They could sell their animal over there. They could bring their money, buy an animal here, and give it for the sacrifice and so on, or take it for the eating of the lamb. So he cast those money changers out of the church, and Jesus leaves Jerusalem again. Then on the next day, the fig tree was dried up. The following day after that, they reserved the upper room. Remember, he sent his disciples to go and find this guy and tell where will the master eat the Lord's Supper, or eat the Passover. And then on Wednesday in the night, Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. So it's just after sundown on Tuesday. Because you get the night first, and then the daylight. You'd say, well, okay, that was the night part of Wednesday. And then in the night he was taken, betrayed, and captured. In the daylight time of the 14th of Nisan was the trials. Jesus was crucified, and 3 hours of darkness, and the tomb. Jesus placed in the tomb on Wednesday late afternoon. Then you have Thursday in the night part, Thursday in the day part, and so on. It goes across the next days. And what happened on Sunday, what happened on the Monday, what happened on Tuesday, and what happened on Wednesday. I think you'll want this. There's a lot of Bible verses on here. It should be a real blessing to you. But I need to go fairly quickly. Let me just skip most of that page. And the upper room was reserved. They ate the Passover, and Jesus was eating a meal. It seems like that would be the Passover meal. And then he rose up and washed the disciples' feet. And while you're studying that, it's really good to get into this and think about, where was Judas? When did Judas leave? He got his feet washed. Okay, but then he left. And then the emblems were discussed as well, or Jesus instituted it. So again, this coming Thursday night is the anniversary date of when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. We'll arrive at 7:30, and about 7:50 or so we'll start the program with singing and so on. And then when the sun is down, we'll do the Lord's Supper emblems. And the story will continue. So I'll be giving slight bits of the sermon part during the Lord's Supper time, but keeping it really short, and that we can do the emblems and then sing a hymn and go on home. Next week we'll also have the risen Savior. May God bless you.